It's my great honor to have the pleasure of introducing Professor Cornel West, our 24th annual Martin Luther King Jr. speaker. One of America's most gifted and provocative intellectuals, Dr. Cornel West's writing, his speaking, his teaching weaves together the American traditions of the Black Baptist Church, progressive politics, and jazz. Dr. West graduated from Harvard in 3 years, magna cum laude, and Martin Kilson, one of Dr. West's professors at the time, recalls him as, quote, the most intellectually aggressive and highly cerebral student I have taught in my 30 years here, end quote. Dr. West is class of 1943, university professor at Princeton University, and has held previous positions at the University of Harvard University, of course, Union Theological Seminary, Yale University, and the University of Paris. He's published over 17 books and edited about 13 texts. In his major bestseller, Race Matters, philosopher Dr. Cornel West burst onto the national scene with his searing analysis of the scars of racism in American democracy. Race Matters has become a contemporary classic, having sold more than 400,000 copies across the world. Praised by the New York Times for his, quote, ferocious moral vision, quote, Dr. West speaks with an utterly distinctive voice about the thorniest social issues and political issues of our day, and he bridges the gap between black and white opinions. In Democracy Matters, Dr. West returns to the analysis of the arrested development of democracy, both in America and in the Middle East. In a strikingly original diagnosis, he argues that America is to be, if America is to become a better steward of democratization around the world, we must first wake up to the long history of imperialist corruption that has plagued our own democracy. Dr. West last visited the University of Utah in the mid-1990s as a central speaker during our university's 10-year lecture series. He left an important imprint on how we as a university community respond to the educational needs of our increasingly diverse community and state of Utah. His visit today comes at a very important juncture in our university's development and in our university's history. The state of Utah is in the midst of unprecedented demographic changes that will offer many, many more opportunities for the University of Utah to help shape and improve the educational conditions and the success of historically underserved communities. Today, I have no doubt that his visit to the University of Utah will provide strong inspiration to many, many members of our many diverse communities in the continuing struggle for greater equality. Please join me in welcoming back Professor Cornel West.
What a blessing and honor and privilege to be back. Oh yes, University of Utah, Salt Lake City, Utah. Oh, it is beautiful. Sky and mountain. Boy, to make the move from Jersey to Salt Lake requires a paradigm shift. In more ways than one. Oh, I am so very, very delighted to be here. I want to thank my new friend and brother, Dr. Tavio Villapando, not just for those kind words, but for your work and for your witness. Let's give him a hand. It's so very... courageous brown brothers and sisters to join hands with courageous black brothers and sisters and yellow brothers and sisters and red brothers and sisters and white brothers and sisters. What I'm told, you're the right man for that, don't you? And that makes a difference. So I do very much salute you. I want to salute my dear brother who picked me up at the airport, who's just such a magnificent human being and a distinguished scholar. wrestling with categories of racial battle fatigue. His name, of course, is Dr. Professor William Smith. Just stand, my brother. Both of you all working together in such an exemplary way. I think other universities can learn much from the degree in which you work together so well. And of course, given the fact he was born from Chicago, he had a jump start in life. Chicago is a very special place. Your wife from Brooklyn, that's the greatest borough in the world, so you got to jump upon her. Is she here too? Oh yes, stand up, sister. Yes, stand up, give her a hand. Stone says the family affair. It always is. My new friend and brother David Pershing. Appreciate those very, very kind words. Give him a hand as well. Give him a hand as well. What can we say about someone who keeps alive the legacy of Martin? In the end, that's what we're here for. We're going to keep the focus where it belongs. We're talking about the precious legacy of our dear brother Martin Luther King Jr., Fannie Lou Hamer, Diane Nash, Miles Horton, Cesar Chavez. That's what we're here to talk about. So when I invoke the name of Reverend Francis A. Davis, we talking about a brother who went to Tuskegee, on to Berkeley, pastor of Calvary Baptist Church. Stand, my brother. Stand, my brother. Still at it with such style and elegance. You can tell he's old school from his bow tie. I'm old school too. I'm Curtis Mayfield, you Louis Armstrong. That's all right. That's old school. We're going to say something to young folk these days. Especially these hip hop artists now. Oh, where's your Curtis? Where's your Aretha? Where's your Donna Hathaway? We're going to get to that. And then, of course, there's two towering figures in the legal field who we both respect and love so much. I'm talking about Judge Jana Graves Robertson. Please stand as well. Yes, indeed. And Judge Tyrone Bentley. Where's Tyrone Bentley? Is he here? I don't know whether he's here, but we're clapping anyway. And last but not least, I want to end on a very personal note. Anytime I get close to Utah, and especially get close to my dear Mormon brothers and sisters, I never forget that it was a dean of admissions at Harvard University who looked at my transcript from Chocolate Slice of Sacramento, California, and decided to let me into Harvard College to take a risk on the fast-talking, freedom-loving young black man. And he turned out to be, of course, president of this institution later on. He is my dear friend and brother, President Chase Peterson. Please stand, Brother Chase. Please stand, Brother Chase. Yes, oh, indeed, absolutely. Love you, little brother. We're back now 38 years it is. Now, who would think that a Mormon brother would take a risk on a young black brother like me, and we end up in the same struggle? May not agree on everything, but love and respect each other. Move in the right direction. So good to see you. Get in your blessed family as well. It brings tears to my eyes just looking at you, though, brother. That's a long time now. It's almost 40 years. A lot of good folk have gone in 40 years, not just Martin. Just lost Oscar Peterson. Just lost a host of towering figures who exemplify so much of what Martin stood for, be it in music, the arts, science, or politics. So anytime you talk about the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., you're not just talking about some narrow sphere that has to do with some truncated debate about rights. You're talking about what does it mean to be a certain kind of human being. Anytime we talk about Martin, I must say in all honesty, I only give one lecture a year on Martin at most. When I'm getting too old, it takes too much out of me. He's too close to me. takes years off my life when I have to reflect on his depth and his breadth and his scope of his compassion, his courage, his love, his willingness to sacrifice for something bigger than him, his willingness to serve across the board, but do it in such a way that it's not just an affirmation of an abstract proposition, but a giving of a life in his concrete flesh. That's the brother we're talking about when we talk about Martin Luther King Jr. And he is not to be viewed as some isolated icon sitting on some pedestal in a museum. That if he's not part of a vital and vibrant tradition of struggle for decency and dignity, then he becomes a fetish. We ascribe magical power to him, and we end up allowing him to be Santa Clausified. Santa Clausification of Martin. I can't stand that. Turn him into Santa Claus, walking around like an old man with a smile with goodies in his bag as if somehow he was not a threat. You tame him, you domesticate him, you manicure him, you deodorize him, you lose sight of his funk. Sight of his courage that constituted such a challenge to the powers that be. You lose sight of the degree to which FBI had to keep track of him every day of his life since January 56 until the bullet shot went through his precious body April 4th, 1968. It's so easy to come with a smile and talk about Brother Martin rather than excavating his body and acknowledging that when he was alive and in his flesh, he was the most dangerous black man in America. That's what the FBI said if we believe J. Edgar Hoover. So anytime we mention that brother's name, we ought to shake and tremble. I do. That's why I only talk about the Negro once a year. Too much for me. I'm trying to get Roberta Flack to talk about Donny Hathaway. It's too much. It cuts too deep. It hurts when you love somebody like that and then have to engage in public conversation about how do you keep his legacy alive. I want to be as honest and candid as I can this afternoon. Now, if it were nighttime, it'd probably be a little better. Then it'd be dark. We'd probably have a little music as well. Because I come from a black tradition that says that the spirit doesn't fully descend without a song. You have to have some music and a song in order to open your soul in such a way that you speak the truth and you bear witness, because unarmed truth and unconditional love and unadulterated justice and unadorned beauty is part and parcel of that tradition. And anytime you talk about those things, it's going to shake you up. It's going to unsettle you. It's going to unnerve you, maybe even for a moment unhouse you. So let's begin on a Socratic note and talking about the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. took Socrates very seriously in line 38A of Plato's Apology that says the unexamined life is not worth living. He believed that. But he also knew that the examined life is painful. It takes courage to examine yourself, to interrogate your assumptions and presuppositions, just as it takes courage for America to look itself honestly in the face and say, lo and behold, we've got a legacy of vicious white supremacy and male supremacy and homophobia and class privilege, and we didn't treat our indigenous peoples the way in which we are. That's not GPC chit-chat. Precious red babies and families.
Thank you, Cornel.
You're talking about, appreciate it, brother. You're talking about black babies and families. The moving borders with Texas, once Mexico, and is now USA. American imperial expansion. Losing sight of humanity, the vast majority of human beings who are sisters of all all colors, losing sight of the humanity of gay brothers and lesbian sisters, not accenting the humanity of disabled. That's not cheap PC chit-chat. If you're going to take seriously the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., you have to engage in Socratic self-examination and self-interrogation. William Butler Yeats, the greatest poet in the English language of the 20th century, comes from the Irish context, the rich Irish context. Joyce, Shaw, wow, sing, towering artists. William Butler Yeats said what? It takes more courage to examine yourself and keep track of the dark corners of your own soul than it does for a soldier to fight on the battlefield. Martin Luther King Jr. tried to exemplify courage in examining himself. He knew actually that the Greek for that line 38:8 says that the unexamined life is not a life of the human. The human. You know, our English word human derives from the Latin humando. Humando means what? We have these wonderful, brilliant students here. You know, humando means what? Burying. That's where humility comes from. Humanity comes from. Burying, tied to earth, soil, dust, dirt. Beautiful. That's where you start. Martin Luther King Jr. comes out of a tradition, especially among people of African descent, that says, how do I wrestle with the most frightening and terrifying question that any of us have, which is, what does it mean to be a featherless, two-legged, linguistically conscious creature born between urine and feces? That's us. Put on your three-piece suit if you want to. But that love push in your mama's womb with the stinking stench and blood got you out, and your body will one day be the culinary delight of terrestrial worms unless you're out for cremation. That sentence in space and time. You're not here that long. What kind of human being are you going to be in the meantime in your move from womb to tomb? That's a Socratic question. America doesn't like to raise that question too much because we're a hotel civilization in the language of Henry James. Hotel is what? The fusion of a market and a home. We like to stay on the move, buying and selling. We want that soft warmness of the home where the women have to stay home oftentimes to do the caring and nurturing as the men go out into the heartless, cold world of competition in the market. And in such a civilization, those Socratic questions are frightening. Who wants to deal with what it means to be human and wrestle with time and space as the context in which we define who we are as persons? No, that's Brother Mark. That's the tradition of the slaves singing the spirituals in the ring shout. That's the tradition of the blues. Personal catastrophe expressed lyrically. Sweet and sad indictment of misery to preserve the sanity and dignity of a people whose humanity has been called into question. And that's one of the reasons why intellectually and culturally as well as politically, one of the great gifts of black people to America has been a Socratic gift. We are going to raise critical questions about yourself. We're going to raise those questions in such a way that you'll be forced to examine it. So yes, you can tell a story about your founding fathers and their heroic activity against British imperialism. Absolutely, and they deserve credit for being heroic against the British Empire. But we also acknowledge that there's another side to it. 22% of the inhabitants of the 13 colonies were enslaved Africans, and therefore we've got a problem. Talking about freedom on the one hand, but you're promoting slavery on the other. Well, yeah, we got a little creative tension between our principles and practices. I think it's more than that. There's a hypocrisy here, there's a mendacity here, and there's a failure to acknowledge that those very slaves and their labor, along with the indigenous peoples and their land and babies violated, constitute the precondition for your democracy. You wouldn't even be able to talk about democracy unless you had a slave your economy in place, and unless you already had control over the land that was not first yours. We're not trashing or demonizing. No, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and others ought to be affirmed in their struggle for freedom. These are the British Empire. Lo and behold, you're going to have to come to terms with this new world form of domination. And we notice you didn't mention it in your Constitution. Scholars call it the conspiracy of silence. That's a very academic way of putting it. No, you didn't want to hit it head on. You didn't have the courage to be morally consistent across the board. And therefore you thought that somehow either it would go away, or you could postpone it, or you could forever live in a state of denial. As if chickens don't come home to roost. As if you don't reap what you sow. And if what goes around doesn't ultimately come around, if you don't come to terms with this institution, you may end up fighting a civil war over an institution not invoked in your Constitution. This is exactly what happened. Socratic questioning. What does it mean to be a certain kind of human being in which you keep track of the commando, the funk, the misery, the night side, the underside? Wonderful line and one of the great blues poets of modern Europe, Paul Celan, wrestling with the Holocaust. Europe, he says, he who speaks truly speaks the shade, keeps the yes and the no unsplit, keeps track of the underside as well as the sunny side, keeps track of the mainstream as well as that which is marginalized. Neither has a monopoly on truth, goodness, or wisdom. The elements in both to keep track of in terms of their contributions. And the issue of forms of death, and it's no accident, this is now the 40th anniversary in a few months. Brother Martin's death. Martin talked about his death ever since January 56. He was only then 27 years old. His house was first bombed. Almost killed his precious baby, Yolanda, who just passed recently. That bomb had been successful and killed Brother Martin and Coretta. We have a very different America, y'all. Very different America. Conceive of Martin, gone. America without Martin. That's like America 19th century without Frederick Douglass. Susan B. Anthony. America would be more than likely crypto-fascist. Because without that kind of leadership at that particular historical moment, given the decolonization going on in the third world, given America moving to the center of the historical stage and trying to tell the world about how they were preoccupied with freedom and liberty, but locked into an apartheid system in the South. Given the fact that there would not have been a figure who could negotiate and navigate between the black freedom movement on the one hand and the emerging white liberals who oftentimes require intense power and pressure to find their backs, given a certain proclivity toward spinelessness. God bless them, but you got to put pressure on them. LBJ stepped up. Sister Hillary reminded us of that recently. She's right, he did step up in terms of legislation. What she didn't say was that not only without Martin and the movement, he wouldn't have stepped up, but what she didn't say was that the dream remains unrealized. Sister Hillary, don't tell me that LBJ have realized the dream. The dream is not realized. You make progress. That's not the realization of a dream. Martin died talking about the nightmare. He said the dream's unrealized because of the wealth inequality, levels of poverty, the disgraceful school systems, the unavailable child care and health care, not enough jobs for the living wage, not enough self-respect and self-love among people of color. How you gonna talk about the dream being realized in those circumstances? But Brother West, we're making progress. Yes, but Malcolm X says what? You don't stab a man in the back 9 inches, pull it out 3 inches, and talk about making progress. A whole lot of work to do. The only reason you make progress is because you have black and brown and yellow and white and other folk coming together willing to bring power and pressure to bear. That's the very way in which you can talk about amelioration. So when you put out these sound bites, you have to really think critically, Socratically. Not just about an election. There's a truth telling that ought to have some relation to the sound bites that you're putting out. But this issue of death is crucial. And there's a real sense in which Martin Luther King understood that one of the reasons why America has such difficulty coming to terms with the vicious legacy of white supremacy. Even these days, people say white supremacy is as if you're just talking about the Ku Klux Klan and their xenophobic cousins. But no, white supremacy takes a number of different forms. There's forms of paternalism and condescension and haughtiness that are covert but still painful and hurtful. There's de facto forms of not wanting too many folk in the neighborhood or too many folk in the school. Too many folk in the social context, but when they come, greet them with a smile. Jim Crow Senior, yes, dead, legal segregation. Jim Crow Junior, de facto segregation. Still alive and well. Who do you socialize with? What radio stations do you really listen to keep track of what's going on? And is it the case we still actually live in very different worlds? That's de facto Jim Crow sensibility. It's not as ugly, it's not as vicious, but it still separates. It still divides. When Martin Luther King Jr. talked about coming to terms with the vicious legacy of white supremacy, he wasn't just talking about minimizing the power of the Ku Klux Klan and other xenophobic groups. So that's a good place to start. Nobody wants to get killed. In fact, Brother Chase, remember the last time I was here, you remember all the threats they had against me? No, brother, we had a time. Remember that? Oh, nothing but Jesus, Holy Ghost, and luck got me out of that thing. I'm back again because I'm always here. And I know they don't speak on behalf of Utah. They don't speak on behalf of Utah. Oh, but after 16 years, the death threat every day, it ain't been no big thing. Not at all. But when Martin was talking about legacy of white supremacy and death, he wasn't just talking about physical death. He was saying in the Socratic sense, philosophy of meditation on preparation for death. That's what Socrates says in Phaedo. Meaning what? That to live a life of decency, wisdom, is to learn how to die in order to be able to live more intensely, critically, and abundantly. You see? The Greeks call paideia, P-A-I-D-E-I-A. Deep education. Formation of attention, that's especially for the young folk. What do you attend to? And I can tell you in part who you are. You attend to the superficial and the frivolous, the G-string and the bling bling. I tell you in part who you are. You attend to deep forms of joy, wisdom, courage, sacrifice that reflects who you are. You see, to cultivate yourself in the face of reality and history and mortality, and allow your soul to undergo maturation so that you can actually deal with bitterness and despair without in any way resorting to revenge. That's learning how to die. Martin Luther King Jr. was asking America, can you come to terms with the forms of death in your past and present? Can you come to terms with social death? 244 years of American slavery was social death for black people. To be socially dead means what? To have no legal status whatsoever, no public standing whatsoever, no public worth whatsoever, just a commodity to be bought and sold so that your child on the slave auction could end up in Texas and you in North Carolina for a lifetime. You're still trying to preserve your humanity, but you are socially dead. That's 244 years, y'all. That's a long time. Can you come to terms with that legacy? Can you come to terms with breaking the back of social death and for 13 years trying to create a multiracial democracy in Reconstruction, a moment in which you had more black senators then than we do now? 2 from Mississippi. Now we got 1 from Illinois. Who's got some aspiration. We'll talk about that later. On my way to South Carolina after this lecture. But the point is, it only lasted for 12 years and civic death set in. American Jim Crow and Jane Crow and lynching, American terrorism began to intimidate and scare these black folk in such a way that they felt somehow they were helpless and hopeless and could not organize and mobilize because they would be shot down like dogs. That's called niggerization. Anytime you niggerize a people, you try to convince them not just that they're less than human, not just you want to exploit their labor, you want to try to convince them that they are so afraid and scared they don't want to speak the truth. They don't want to live the truth. They're hopeless and helpless and therefore deferential to your status quo. That's how you niggerize a folk. British tried to do it to the Irish. Japanese tried to do it to the Koreans. America has been very ingenious in trying to target people of African descent, to niggerize us in such a way that we walk around scratching when it don't itch, laughing when it's not funny, just to somehow negotiate and navigate and cope given the white supremacist terrain, dealing with the white supremacist bombardment in such a way that we have to convince ourselves, I am beautiful, but I don't look like Britney Spears. I am intelligent, but I don't look like Albert Einstein. I can't make it in business, but I don't look like Bill Gates. That I can, in fact, make a contribution without always doing it with white approval as a point of reference. That's part of the wrestling with the niggerization. Civic death. And then the psychic death, the spiritual death. And my God, the spiritual death right now in Chocolate City. It's a nihilism that even Nietzsche could never conceive. It's not just a hopelessness and a meaninglessness, it's a touchlessness and a lovelessness, feeling as if no one cares for you, loves you, you're in the world all by yourself, and it's no longer a neighborhood, it's a hood, with a social Darwinian space, a survival of the slickest with the bullet flowing and the drug being bought and sold, and most of the suffering being rendered invisible. And imagine what the prisons look like in Utah right now. Farmed in from all around the country, bring them to beautiful mountains. But from whence do they come? They come out of these killing fields. That's what these hoods often are. Families shattered, too many black brothers drifting, irresponsible at worst. Mothers overworked, underpaid, can't keep track of the kids, trying to bring home some money, and then bombarded the mass media with VH1 and BET and MTV with these white supremacist stereotypes of black men as sexual predators and black women as just objects of sexual conquest. Not just black, but disproportionately. Where are young black people going to get a sense of strength? What resources are available to them? Thank God for Carmen and Rob Dickey, Lupe Fiasco, and some of the others trying to keep a tradition alive of positive resources, but easily overloaded, pushed to the margins as the refusal to come to terms with the consequences of social death, slavery, civic death, Jim Crow, Jane Crow, psychic death, self-hatred, self-flagellation, self-destruction, and spiritual death, nihilism, lovelessness and meaninglessness and touchlessness. And the response is what? To be tough, achieve more identity. Nobody cares for me, I don't care for anybody else. Crush me, I'll crush you. and I've got some technology in my pocket. It's a situation part. Oh, Brother West, you're exaggerating. America's a different place now. You ought to spend more time at the malls. Smile on their face, can't wait to consume, and somehow think the possession of commodities is going to allow them to possess their souls. Walking around all sharp, the paraphernalia suffering in that wonderful language of Nathaniel West and Miss Lonely Hearts. Hiding conceal the scars and the wounds, because nobody wants to come to terms with it in the end. And Martin said, no, I hold out a hope for America. I'm not optimistic about America. How could I, given the evidence, but I'm a prisoner of hope. That's why that Socratic note of questioning, intensely trying to get us to examine who we are. You can imagine what he said about 9/11. My God. Major discourse on terrorism in America after 9/11. And rightly so. Martin Luther King Jr., I could just see him looking and saying, but wait a minute. All Americans feel unsafe, unprotected, subject to random violence, and hated for who they are. Many white brothers just for the first time. Oh, Brother West, I just can't get over the sense of being hated. Why do they hate me? Oh, to be a black person in America for 400 years. Be unsafe, unprotected, subject to random violence, and hated for who you are. They asked me, I said, we asked Sister Letitia about it. She tell you. Ask Jamal about it. He tell you. Ask any black parent explaining to their black child at 4 years old why they spit on and rebuke. Just on a priori grounds. No evidence, just hated for who they are. They are a people in the midst of the American democratic experience who have been on intimate terms with terrorism, who have lived in close proximity to forms of death, the social and psychic and spiritual, and too soon physical death. Now that the nation has the blues, it's time to learn from a blues people. How have black people dealt with terrorism? Martin wouldn't be the first one to put himself forward, though he would be a good candidate in terms of what he had to say when he gave the eulogy for the 4 precious black sisters in Birmingham at 16th Street Baptist Church, victims of American terrorism. Martin, what do you say? Somehow we've got to muster all that we have in the face of this hatred to promote love and justice. And Matilda's mother, what did she have to say to the world when her child was a victim of American terrorism? In Matilda, in August of 1955, in Robert's Temple, Church of God in Christ on the south side of Chicago. Only child. Father fought in the Jim Crow Army, but he fought with dignity and held the flag. And all of the authorities, federal, state, and local, said, keep that casket closed. She said, no. I've got Socratic sensibilities. I believe in the questioning of America in such a degree that you can see the image of it. We're going to keep it open, and thank God the late great John Johnson with Jet and Ebony magazine took pictures. So the whole world could see the underside of American democracy, the Jim Crow and Jane Crow dimension of it. And when she stepped to the lectern, what did she say, looking over and seeing her baby's head with 5 times the size of its ordinary head? And she said, I don't have a minute to hate. I will pursue justice for the rest of my life. That was the dominant black response to terrorism. Now, do we hear those kind of voices when America is terrorized? Or do we hear we're going to hunt them down like cockroaches? Nobody messes with us. We are the police of the world. Bring them back dead or alive. I say to myself, if black people had responded to American terrorism in that way, you wouldn't have an American democracy. It would have been the counter people terrorized for 400 years and decided not to produce a black Al-Qaeda. They decided not to engage in counter-terroristic organized activity, but kept dishing out Frederick Douglass and Martin King and Diane Nash and Francis Davis and many nameless and anonymous black folk who were terrorized but still said, I'm not getting in the gutter with the gangsters. I'm going to move to a higher moral and spiritual ground. I'd rather lose than be right than win and be a gangster like the gangsters who were terrorizing me. That's a great history, y'all. Martin Luther King Jr. is just a symbol and a sentiment. You see Negroes walking around, you ought to just give them a standing ovation. Thank you. You saved the American democracy. You could have gone underground and terrorized us. Martin Luther King Jr. could have stood up there and said, you know, I once loved white brothers and sisters, but I changed my mind. And I got 150,000 folk in Washington, D.C. right now. And I can hear some white brothers say, well, Brother West, you're going too far. What about the Nation of Islam? The Nation of Islam is a counter-terrorist group. That's a lie. They may not agree with their ideology. They may have some xenophobic elements in it in regard to gay brothers, patriarchal sensibility to women, wrestling with characterization of our Jewish brothers and sisters. The Nation of Islam has never actually engaged in any offensive attack on any white community. They said, well, the way Minister Louis Farrakhan talks, it looks like he has it in mind. Don't confuse Minister Louis Farrakhan's hatred of white supremacy and his love for black people in his own way with any kind of Al-Qaeda sensibility. It doesn't work. It's wrong. It's false. You can disagree with him if you want, but be honest in terms of what he's about. Well, what about the Black Panther Party? Self-defense, police and the police, because the police had killed too many black folk. That's not Al-Qaeda killing innocent people. Al-Qaeda's gangster to the core. Anytime you kill innocent people, I don't care what color it is, you're a gangster. They could be the CIA and Chile. That's gangster activity. It could be the KGB in Russia, it could be the Gestapo in Germany. That's gangster activity. So what about the isolated acts of black folk attacking white folk? Yeah, you got a point there. That's real. It's not political, it's not organized, it's not mobilized. It's individuals engaging in gangster activity against a variety of different folk. Disproportionately black, but also spilling over into vanilla suburbs. And here we got the black-brown gang activity and so forth. Let's be clear about what we mean by this. So when you talk about Martin King and him being part of a wave of an ocean of a freedom movement, expressing the best, trying to keep contact with the humanity of all, but recognizing that he puts a priority on those whose humanity has been radically called into question coming out of his own black context. We ought to be clear about the nature of the achievement. And this is where he actually goes far beyond Socrates, because as you all know, Socrates himself never wrote words. I don't recommend that for students at University of Utah here. They don't want to be like Socrates in that sense. You want to write those papers. But Socrates also never cries, never shed a tear. Ever. Even on his deathbed, his wife Xanthippe's crying. He said, get out of the way, I can't stand tears. So anybody can't stand tears, it's got some inadequacies. No matter how sharp their mind, no matter how sophisticated their analysis. Because anybody who's never cried has never really loved anybody. When they're gone, when they hurt you, when they're absent, when you hurt them, when they're in the coffin. If you never really loved at that level, there's a sense in which you never really lived. And that's one of the ways in which Martin Luther King Jr. out-Socratizes Socrates. He asks questions that even Socrates himself refuses to ask. Because when you raise that question of what it means to be human, you are talking in part about tears of sorrow and tears of joy. And Martin Luther King Jr. comes out of a struggle of a people with tears, very much like Jewish brothers and sisters in Hebrew scripture that begins with cries of affliction, with a covenant with a higher power that says, I hear your cry, and all I ask of you is to do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with thy God. All I ask of you is to define yourself in such a way that you put a priority on the stranger and the needy and the widow and the least of these. And of course, Martin Luther King Jr. cannot be understood unless you accent his love affair with a first century Palestinian Jew named Jesus. Democrat, yes. Exemplary citizen, yes. But in the end, he's a gut-bucket black Christian who fundamentally believed that Jewish Jesus of Nazareth had something to say in terms of what it means to be human, echoing that 25th chapter of Matthew. Whatever thou do to and for me, do to the least of these. That you will be measured in terms of what is the depth of your love to others and the quality of your service to others. Don't worry about the success of the world. Don't worry about becoming so well adjusted to injustice that you lose sight of your hypersensitivity to the suffering of others. Tell young folk, especially in the colleges, yes, we want you to be successful, but we don't want them to confuse financial prosperity with moral magnanimity. We don't want to confuse individual security with personal integrity. Magnanimity and integrity and hypersensitivity to suffering and what you do in response to it is the benchmark of greatness. And we got too many folk who are highly successful but are nowhere near that criteria of greatness. Martin Luther King Jr. understood that. One of the reasons why he was preoccupied with that legacy of Jerusalem was that he could envision a society that produced this bourgeois spaces of peacocks. People just can't wait to gain access to that middle class space where people could see how successful they were and what their achievements and accomplishments were, and others could put them in People magazine and become so obsessed with celebrities that somehow you associate celebrity status with great status. What I call peacocks. Peacocks. Martin Luther King Jr. comes out of a tradition that says peacocks strut because they can't fly. They walk around in self-satisfaction and self-affirmation because they can't get off the ground. Martin Luther King Jr. was an eagle. He got off the ground to keep track of the folk catching hail, the mention of the earth in the language of France. You see. So he was less concerned about success and more concerned about a greatness and magnanimity that was rooted in the witness of a Palestinian Jew named Jesus. He understood that his conception of who he was deeply Judaic and Christian, because he understood the deep link between prophetic Judaism and Christianity. It's not like Mel. What's the brother who made that film? Brother Mel Gibson. So he's going to make a literal film, but Jesus never Jewish. Oh, it's going to be real literal. All right. Speaking of make him Jewish. He's a Jewish brother of swarthy complexion. We won't get into that today. But the criteria of greatness, and then he brings it into the public square as a citizen. He respects the atheistic citizens. He respects the agnostic citizen. He respects the Muslim citizen. He respects the Jewish citizen. He respects the Hindu and Buddhist citizen across the board. But he's honest in terms of where he comes from. And of course, it's always with a difference. I'm going to bring this to a close. Say good time for question and answer, because I'm in no rush at all. I ain't gonna leave till much later. Well, get back to you talking. But that's what the difference. At the Socratic note, the courageous questioning, examining one's oneself to such a degree that one recognizes that all of us are cracked vessels. And then that prophetic note, the legacy of Jerusalem. That wonderful line of W.H. Auden, how do we learn to love our crooked neighbors with our crooked hearts? That's Martin. It's Augustinian. Deeply Christian of a certain sort. But that third element is the blues element. Martin Luther King Jr. was a blues man. The blues is no plaything. It's not a form of amusement and entertainment solely. It's a way of life. Ray Duke Ellington used to say black people make dissonance a way of life. Living in the minor key, not just resorting to it every once in a while, going back to D major and C major. The D major moment in the grand opera of the last opera for Richard Strauss, the mirror scene. That C major, Handel, creation, making God is good. Now move it to the minor key, flatten it out, funk it up. Because the life been funky is what Samuel Beckett called the mess. Beckett is a blues man from the Irish context. The mess, the funk of it. Fail. Well, try again. Fail better. Try again. Fail better. You're never getting out of it, but you can have a dignity in it. That's the end game. Blues. Blues is neither optimistic nor pessimistic. The categories do not exist. Optimism is a secular construct of a hotel civilization or a European world in which it looks as if they're solving all the problems of the world. What an illusion. Black folk have never been optimistic. Individual Negroes have been. And I meet individual Negroes who are highly optimistic, and I smile, and I know things are going well for them. But I ask them about their cousins, and I ask them about others, and I say, what about them? They say, I've forgotten. I said, that's why I'm not optimistic. But it's not just about me and my own egocentric predicament in terms of how my personalistic agenda is taking place. Maybe I do have a film in Sundance, and I do appreciate that. God bless it. I don't know which way Sundance is, but God bless it. That's achievement, that's success, that justification of celebration. Is that justification for optimism? Of course, well, absolutely not. To be a blues man or woman is to be a prisoner of hope. Hope is a qualitatively different category than optimism or pessimism. When you hear the blues men say they've been down so long, the down don't worry me no more. When you hear the blues man say that nobody loves me but my mama and she might be jiving too. That's neither optimistic nor pessimistic. The song itself is a resistance against the despair, but at the same time, it's a recognition of wrestling with the worst. Thomas Hardy, that other blues maker coming out of the English tradition, his poetry and novels. What are you saying, Brother West? Let us not in any way defame and tame and domesticate Martin Luther King Jr. and his legacy without keeping track of the grand Socratic challenge, the prophetic witness, and the tragic comic sensibility, which is what the blues is all about, in which you acknowledge, in fact, that there's always too much suffering, but you want to do something about the suffering that you can respond to. There's always too many tears. If it's not here, it's in Asia. If it's not Asia, it's in the Middle East. If it's not in the Middle East, it's in Africa. If it's not in Africa, it's in Latin America. If it's not in Salt Lake City, just look closely at Salt Lake City. Your Salt Lake City is too narrow. Burst out of your bubble. Burst out of that's Martin's challenge. His challenge is, in the end is to what? To say, you know what? In the end, we have each other. In the end, we either hang together or hang separately. In the end, we keep our eyes not on each other's inadequacies, but try to tell the truth, expose the lies and bear witness so we can accent the best in each and every one of us. Resort to the better angels of our nature in the wonderful language of Abraham Lincoln. Keep our eyes on a prize bigger than us. Earth, wind, and fire say, keep your head to the sky. Mahalia Jackson said, keep your hand on the plow. So that you can say, I decided to be this kind of human being, and whatever sexual orientation, pigmentation, class, color I am, I can choose to have integrity. I can choose to be great morally. I can choose to be courageous. I can choose to sacrifice. I can choose to keep track of the young folk in these chocolate cities. It's up to you, and then together we organize and mobilize. Can we bring the present ice age to a close? That's the question I want to end with in terms of Mark. I know he's turning over in his grave. He looks at America in the last 30 years. This civilization has made it fashionable to be indifferent to the suffering of the most vulnerable. And that indifference is what always upset him. Great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel used to say, indifference to evil is even more evil than evil itself. George Bernard Shaw, The Devil's Disciple, one of those early plays, he said, indifference is the very essence of inhumanity. William James, that grand public philosopher, said indifference is the one trait that makes the very angels weep. And there's too much indifference during this ice age. It is not just a question of Republican rule, even though they have made their contribution. Democrats as well. Independents as well. Those who do not participate in the system whatsoever as well. Indifference is ideologically promiscuous. The question is, how do we melt the ice age in such a way that it becomes cool, hip, and appealing to fall in love with truth and justice, and to fall in love with serving others? That's Mark. What a challenge. I hope it makes you shake and tremble. Thank you.